There we go. There. Okay. Glad y'all are here tonight. I keep going in the wrong direction. There we go. Any questions or thoughts after last week?
I have a question about what is there, and I thought maybe we'd answer it tonight, what's the difference between just learning and discernment? I mean, we learn things in school all the time, and we hear stuff. We don't know whether it's true or not, but we learn things. Now, how do you know what you've learned is true?
And that's the discerning part.
That's the discerning part. So you learn things, and then later on in life, you question some of them. I guess that's the answer to my own question.
That's a good question, because a lot of people learn without discerning. They just learn the facts and chew them up and spit them back out, and they never process any of it. And my best teachers would have said that was not learning. That unless you're able to reach some choices about what you're learning, it's really not learning. And then discerning always involves some kind of choice.
Yeah, that's what I was.
You're making a value judgment. You're having to make a value judgment when you discern.
In this movie I saw the other night,
Yeah.
Heretic, the two young lady missionaries, one of the missionaries, he was trying to get them to discern whether they have belief or unbelief. He was trying to get them to discern that themselves.
Yeah.
And I applied what we talked about last week with this. But then the movie takes a whole different approach to things. I won't go into details. You just need to go see it.
Tonight, we're going to do the more process of discerning, and it is the one that we're really going into tonight is put together by Valerie Eisenhower and Judith Todd in this workbook called Living into the Answers. Like I said, if you're big into workbooks, it's a very good workbook and got some good text in it. I've got handouts for you. I did the pictures of the slides this time because it's the same number of pages as doing the words. So that's always good. And then you will want this one so you can see it and maybe make notes. But I've enjoyed looking at this book, and I hope y'all cut that light so there's not a glare on the screen. All right. So this is the picture of the model that they propose. They call it movements and discernment. And you'll notice it's a circle. It's trying to get us away from thinking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and always in this order. And there's constant interaction with each of the stages and God. So there's a God is at the center of it, and the idea is that in each of these stations, better than stages, you're interacting with God. And they also point out, and we'll talk about this tonight, that sometimes you go back a few steps and do a little more work before you go back and move along. And that this work is within the issue that you're trying to determine. And the first one is naming and framing, which is at about 5 o'clock. And the naming is, and this sounds silly, but it's really important for a lot of people to just name, what is the question I'm trying to get an answer to? Because sometimes it's, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know, blah. What is the question you're trying to answer? What's the decision? What's the specific issue? I'm unhappy with my job. well, what's your decision? Are you your choice? You trying to make a decision whether to stay or go or change something? And what is the specific question? And that comes back several times. What triggered my desire for guidance? Why is this something that you just don't just go ahead and do? To ask ourselves that can help us understand what's going on within us. To say, okay, the reason why I'm asking this is my boss treated me poorly, or I don't have enough money, or I'm unsatisfied, getting to, why am I even thinking about this? And what pieces make up the issue? And we'll go into that much more detail, but you begin to say, okay, what's going on here that I want to discern? And then the framing is, as you get to this issue, what are some questions that are arising? Is it about the value of your work? Is it about the value of work? If it's about, whether or not you're going to retire, how am I going to live? How am I going to make? What can I do? Do I want to continue some work? Can I maintain myself? Or would I be even happy if I wasn't working? So what are the questions? And so you just kind of start writing these things down as they come to you. And that gives you the beginning of a frame of what is it we're talking about. That makes sense. Okay. The next one is centering. And this is where I wish so many people would do more work. What core values intersect with this issue? What are the things that I should have put it the other way, that you must consider? Because other people will have different things that they must consider. And so, as some good examples of it, theology, who you think God is, and what you believe about God. Ethics, right and wrong. What are your ethics and your feelings about integrity and those kinds of things?
Will I get arrested if I do?
Will I get arrested if I do this? Important questions. Family, how does this impact those people that are important to me? Stewardship, how does this impact your stuff? And what do you have enough, too much? What adjustments will it make to the things that you're responsible for taking care of? And then your citizenship, what impact is it going to have on the community around you if you do this? I think that's just really important that we help people see that there's a lot of things, and they're going to be different for different people. Like for some people, the theology thing may be the whole question for them. And other folks, that's going to be a small piece. And they'll be more concerned about what the impact on my family is going to be. That makes sense?
Yeah, I think you have to mature into even understanding those
You do.
issues and what they are for you.
And I think, or my hope is if young people can begin thinking about this, that will help the maturation process. Because when you get older, you kind of think about these things. And you get there because you've learned that you needed to consider that, when you went into that job, you thought, it's a little iffy what they do, but it's a good job. So I'll be okay. And then you get there and you're absolutely miserable because it's a little iffy what they do. And I've seen that happen to a lot of folks in the job world.
And if you're talking about job, one of the questions would be, do I enjoy doing this?
Yeah. And can I do one for me as I think about core values is, can I do my best work here?
Yeah.
If you're being told to, don't work that hard. We don't need it that good. I'd be miserable. I'd be absolutely miserable in that kind of stuff. And then another part of the centering, there's something in a term in spiritual direction called holy indifference, which means you're saying, okay, whatever you want, God, I'm going to be fine with that. And they call it holy indifference. You're declaring your willingness to follow what God says. And you're becoming indifferent in a way to some things that you might need to let go of. And so you begin to ask yourself, what are some things, if I move forward in this, that I might have to let go of, that I thought was important? And I love the way the author puts it. How do you find those things? Those are the things that pop up when you say, yes, but those are things you might need to let go of. And that helps clarify that a lot. Those things that, oh yeah, I could do this, but that's a problem. And then you move to remembering. And this is very important for people of faith. We say you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And so some things to remember were interesting. What were some, because this is something I also see in the maturation process, is young adults, they tend to treat each major decision as if it's the only time they've ever had to decide that. And it's a whole new thing. And they haven't quite learned that you've been through decisions before. What worked last time? How did that work for you last time? They love it when we say that. So this is part of that is, what were some major turning points in your life that you've already been through? Remember that? Remember how that went? What were some points where you really felt God's presence? What was that like? Sometimes when you sought God's guidance, how did that feel? How did that look? How did that unfold in previous times? And I think it comes back into, in our panic, sometimes we forget we've done this before, and what we've done before can inform what we need to do now. And I think one of the things about this process is it seems so slow, but it gets you to step back from the panic and the rush and say, okay, I've been here before. Oh, I remember that didn't go well. Why we don't want to do that again? So times you felt God's guidance, times when you felt God's absence. What made that happen? What was the choice that led to that? Remembering the biblical stories, the reminders of characters and incidents in the Bible that you go, oh yeah, that's just like this, or that helps me think about this. Stories from our faith community, the people. I can tell you all kinds of stories of the church I grew up in, of different things that happened to different people and what we saw happen and how it unfolded. Those are things we can remember. What else about that?
Today I heard God is actually very talkative. I'm still thinking about that.
I like that.
Because true, he is, and we have the Bible, but
God is always speaking to us. God is always speaking to us. God is very talkative. I have to remember that. It's good. All right, the next one is listening. So you're listening for different sources or voices. Facts are very good to listen to. People in your life, people that you tend to listen to. Listening to what yourself is saying to you. Listening, and this was really good, to other things that have a really strong influence on you, like music. For some people, when they go and they play their guitar, their piano, they're centered and they calm down and it really speaks to them. Or there may be certain pieces of music that are very important to them. Hobbies, music, art, nature, walking in the woods. I go for a hike anytime I've got to work through something. So what are some of those other influences that you need to listen to or participate in? And then to remind us it's not all in our head, is how do those things make you feel? What are those things What do you feel about those facts and what those facts are telling you, and what the people are telling you, and what yourself is telling you, and what these activities are telling you? How's that feeling in your gut? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But it's easy for those of us that work in our heads so much to say, okay, this is our list, and ignore, okay, well, when so-and-so says that, that makes my stomach turn. And when I process it on a hike, I feel a sense of peace. And I know that, hey, this feels right. This feels good. So listen to your feelings as well as the sources.
Biographies for some details about the person you're reading, the information you're reading. Andrew Jackson, until I read his biography, I didn't know that he was an orphan. He was on his own at 14 years old, doing a man's work, and a lot of things I didn't know about him. And that sort of showed me, here's why he was like he was.
And these different, paying attention to these things helps us understand what's going on here. Yeah. We listen to our fears. What are those things that, are making us feel on edge? And when we think about those fears, we pray about them, and we can try to address them. And they suggest that when you're starting to name what are those fears, that you go back to that framing again and say, okay, is this a question that I need to make sure I answer? I need to get through. Did I forget to include this on the things I need to investigate? Oh, come on. I'm hitting the wrong button. It's not its fault. There we go. And then you may need to go back to centering and think about, all right, did I miss out on a core value that's causing this fear to arise? And I need to reconsider it. I hadn't considered that as a factor in this process. And what might I need to let go of? So you go back to that centering and ask those questions again. All right, if I'm feeling this anxiety and fear about this, maybe there's something that I'm holding on to that I need to let go of. So that kind of reinforces that sometimes you go the other way on the circle. Does that make sense? And then listening also, listening for the Holy Spirit to speak to us, spending time in Scripture and looking through Scripture is, okay, something didn't occur to me in a story or something that I remember from Scripture. Let me look and see what I can find. Spending time in prayer, having conversation with God about, okay, what are you trying to say to me here, God? I need to hear you. Help me hear you. And then listening, and this is something that we do when we do group discernment is, all right, what are some common threads as I begin to look at all these things? Are there some things starting to come together where they're all heading in the same direction? That's help. You start to feel, okay, now I know I'm headed in the right direction. But then they point out also to listen and look for diverging paths, so that, maybe 3 of them are all moving in some direction and one is going off this way, one voice or source, and you're going, okay, now, do I need to listen to this one or do I need to drop this one? Why are they diverging? Why are there 2 real clear threads or paths coming up? And we'll come back to that, but I think that's a helpful thing for people to think about.
Sometimes what speaks to me is not trustworthy to others. So
what speaks to you is not. That's true.
Not a trustworthy process for others.
Yeah. Well, like if you're talking with people who aren't Christians, saying, well, what does the Bible say about it? Can mean very little to them up front if they haven't done that before. If
They
they
might
do
not
it,
know, and they might not care.
yeah, and they might just say that. I really don't care what the Bible says about this. And so that goes back to the, what are some other voices
Well, see, now for me, it would be, all right, that's the third time I've run into that Bible verse this week.
ding, 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 that
I'm
should
going
mean something to
assume
you.
that is a message.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that holy God is messy
Mhm.
with his communications to me.
Mhm.
I'm messy in how I take them in and notice them and can speak to him. But he's very orderly. And so, but I know that not everybody would believe in that. And coincidences
Yeah.
as being rich with me.
Yeah. And so I like the common threads things because, all right, so you're not hearing this here. Are you hearing it from three other? Is this coming up again and again? Maybe it's not coincidence. What was it? There's a James Bond quote. Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, and three times is enemy action. And
Or the opposite.
or the opposite. So the idea is, a weird thing can happen once, and if it keeps happening, then you might want to pay attention to that. And I think discernment, part of that is paying attention to these weird things that happen. Different people come and say to you the same thing. Different people mention what you're dealing with, and they don't know that you're dealing with it. Those are the kind of things you want to pay attention to.
It may also be you recognizing
Yeah.
that what they're saying really fits my situation.
Right.
And it may be coming more to you because you choose to listen to what they say.
Right.
Or
Right.
translate it into what you think it should be.
Because that's what's on your mind.
Yeah.
But you got to pay attention to it because sometimes we still ignore it. So path building. And this is when you begin to think, okay, what are some different ways for me to go on this? And we talked about if we focus in on what is God's will as a single option for us, then it can lead us into some problems when it doesn't work out. So think about what are some possible paths. I could do this and list that. I could do this and I could do this. Well, what would be some necessary steps if you want to get this? Well, you need a PhD for this job. Is that going to happen? Is that something, or this one, I'm going to need to move to Alaska. Is that worth something you want to pursue? So what are the necessary steps for each of these possible paths? Where is it going to take you? What's the destination? Not just physical, but satisfaction and connection with other people. Where is this going to take you? And that's another question I think we don't ask enough. If you make this decision, where might it lead down the road?
One of the first things I guess we expect our young children and people is what kind of education do I need?
Mm-hmm.
What I want to
Mm-hmm.
do. And then sometime in there, what kind of network do I have with other people?
Mm-hmm.
What other people, individuals do I want to be mentored by?
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of paths that are available to us.
At one point, I think before I came to Hominy, we were trying to say, all right, what do we do now? And I said, people said, well, move back to Georgia. Well, we've been gone now at that point for 10 years. And I said, and all the people I know and all the networking I've done is in North Carolina. I do not want to start that over again. All the people I know, all the people I work with, all the people who know I am, they're all in North Carolina. This is not just home for me, but I don't want to start over at age 40 something.
But there might be people who would call that an adventure.
Oh, some people would. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why what is it? How does it resonate with you? And what distinguishes one path from another? What makes one different from another? You know, this one might be more money. This one might be a great place to live. This one might be excitement. This one might be security. Again, what makes these paths different? And
the pros and cons list comes in?
yeah, it really is. It's where the pros and cons, but it's not just yes, no. It's what is positive here and what's going to be the outcome. And then your gut reaction, you know, sometimes you have a very visceral reaction to an option and you know, not in a million years. You take that one off the table. And you ask, you know, is that my fear that's keeping me from wanting to do that? Or is there a real reason for that?
Yeah, I heard recently that go with your gut has no basis in Christian faith. You can't support that. But can you?
What was the word?
Go with your gut as a concept is not really a Christian concept. You would disagree?
The way people typically use it, there's some truth to that, but there's also some stuff. The Greek word for compassion is like what comes from your gut. So there are some meanings and crossovers in there. But yes, the way a lot of people use it is whatever you know, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, whatever feels right.
You're talking
It's a
about
little less.
intuition.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean, or what do you hear when somebody else says, go with your gut? I think it does remove discernment from go to God.
Yeah.
And it puts it in your spidey sense,
Yeah.
or whatever you mean when you say go with your gut.
I think you can have a Christian intuition, or a friend of mine would say a baptized intuition that includes a sensitivity for what God is saying, and that your intuition is shaped by your faith. But it can also be shaped by your lack. It's not the be all end all. It's probably a good way to think about it.
So I probably would consider the going through gut, what you said with whatever feels right. It's that initial quick, this is what I feel, and I'm not really weighing it out or considering a lot of other factors.
Yeah.
But I think it was John Ortberg's stuff that really emphasized a lot about, you know, this feels right because God has made you that way. He has put some of those passions or desires in you, or maybe you're good at math and so you're in, or whatever, you know, there are some of those things, and you should be considering those kind of feelings. But maybe not the quick reaction.
Yeah, not the quick reaction. I guess that's not when I say go with the gut, I'm usually not thinking about the quick, let's do it. I also consider the negative visceral reaction you have where this possibility makes your stomach roll over. Pay attention to that. If it makes you want to throw up, your body is part of the process.
The first impression, sometimes we use first impression, but that's not a very good. Intuition is one thing, first impression
Impressions
is
is a little bit
something else.
better.
First impression is bad news.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
oh, super. Perfect.
Yeah, wonderful. That sounds good. Yeah.
That's, to me, intuition is a little bit deeper than first impression.
Yeah, yeah. And more about the questioning of those paths, and we'll come back to these first two questions again and again. Is this something that leads me closer to God or further away? Is there an echo of the fruits of the Spirit in it, or the Christian virtues? Or do we see these on this path or not? And we'll come back into that at least twice more. So then the sifting. So you got these paths. So how do you decide? So which path emerges most clearly? Is there something that, boy, this is becoming really clear? This is where I need to go. On which path does the Spirit rest? And then it's that sense of, all right, God's in this. I can see that this is opening up. I can see that this echoes with my faith. I can see God's hand in this, and I just feel like God's in this path. It's one of the things we look at there. And then the consolation, and we'll come back to this, is this idea of moving closer to God. And then desolation is the idea of moving away from God. So we ask ourselves, is this something moving away or closer to God? And they remind us to, sometimes our sense of, is because of our fears, not because of where God is in the process. So distinguish between, am I feeling God's presence or not, from this makes me incredibly nervous because of some of those. And maybe go back to those questions and say, okay, what is it I'm afraid of? And that's always a good question. What is it I'm afraid of? It's a good question to ask somebody else when you're trying to help them. You're afraid. Tell me, what is it you're afraid of? And that can be a very discerning kind of process. And then sometimes we don't get consolation or desolation. We get confusion. And so they say, all right, that's another chance. Go back. What have you missed? What question did you not ask or not consider? What answer? Sometimes we get an answer and we move on. And we ignore it because we didn't like that answer. And so we ignore it. So go back. What were some things that you saw already to this point, and did you really pay attention to them? Or is there something that you're hanging on to that you need to let go of? If God had wanted me to go back to Georgia, I would have to have let go of wanting to be here in North Carolina. So that when we have that confusion, go back and see what we've not paid attention to. And then we move to resting, which is very hard for Americans and Baptists and I don't know who, maybe everybody. Found this great quote. I don't know if I told you about this. I sent it to the water department. This is from the Tai Ching. Who is it that can make muddy water clear, but if allowed to remain still, it will gradually become clear of itself? And I sent it to the spokesman for the actual water service. And I said, this just made me laugh. And he just loved it. He thought it's the best thing ever. But it is that idea of you have to reach a point where you just stop trying to muscle your way through it and take a break.
And let it settle.
And let it settle. And let it settle. Boy, we are not good at that, are we?
We used a lot of, what was it? Aluminum, silicate.
So, yeah.
Sand. We
Yeah.
poured a lot of sand back into the lake.
Because we were in a hurry. Got to have water, which I understand because it was me. But when you're trying to make major decisions and major discernments, you got to have time to rest, to be still, to pray, to take walks, however it is that you still yourself. And prayer. And then this is a good quote. God, if this new thing is right for me, let it take root and increase in my life. If it is wrong for me, let it become less and less important to me, and let it decrease in my life. I like that. I like that. Let it take root if this is where I need to go. And sometimes that's the way it unfolds. There's something that you thought was a major thing, and you get focused on something else and suddenly realize that thing that you thought was so major, take it or leave it. And we've all experienced that. So that resting allows us to listen to that. And then another part about resting is learning to hold it lightly. Hold it lightly, which means we kind of hold it like this instead of like this. And we're willing. Hey, kid.
Did you put them in the dark?
Have some snacks.
Yeah, there's some food over there.
Come on over.
So holding it lightly means you're willing to let it go and release it to God and let God do his thing. And instead of, I've got this, I've got it figured out, this is the only way to go, this is it. And boy, we want to be there. We want to grasp whatever it is we've gotten and hold on to. But discernment and spiritual direction says, hold it lightly. And that way God can take it and bless it and do all those things. And you are not trying to control it the way we love to control things. Hard for us. And then Joe's heard me use these a lot of times. Cassian's questions are very old. And for some, this is the whole discernment process in a nutshell. But it is really for this time of rest when you've done all the homework and now you're kind of evaluate, is it filled with what is good for all? Is it heavy with the fear of God, the respect for God, what God wants in this? Is it genuine in the feelings that underlie it? Is it lightweight with human glory or novelty? Ancient words, but boy, don't they make sense. Is there consolation, that sense of peace and movement towards God? Or is there desolation, a sense of dis-ease and a movement away from God? And those are the kind of questions that we ponder during that resting stage.
Caitlin Chess, she's on that Holy Post podcast.
Yeah.
I have to write down quotes, and this was one from one of the podcasts I think probably a year ago. And it said, is this geared toward my consumption or for my creativity?
Ooh, I like that.
I feel like that fits really, really well if that's how it is.
That's my pen.
Which, thinking of something we're grasping onto, that makes sense. We're bringing towards our consumption. But I think creativity is something that needs to be spread and given out.
Or sharing.
Yeah.
Using or sharing.
Consumption or creativity, is it for holding on to, or is it for giving away? Would be some of things. But yeah, that I like that consumption, because creativity is always a part about who God is. And I like that comment. I'm going to throw that in there. All right, so before we talk about voices, what about that process resonates with you and says, okay, that makes sense, and maybe what about it doesn't ring true for you?
It's time consuming.
Yeah.
Most of us don't have time to make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt like, you go first.
Yeah, you go.
Oh, yeah. I always feel like it's so unfair that one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. Because isn't that just a summary one? Isn't that just a catch-all for all of it? I mean, if you have self-control, you don't need to study all the rest of those fruits of the Spirit. And just how frustrating that is to me. Because, for instance, in the exercise of being a parent, step one is to understand that here is this living thing that depends completely on you to make all the choices, to do all the things. But from the moment of birth, you have to start backing out of your job. You have to, and that is such exquisite self.
Until you finally reach the point where you have no control over yourself and your child has complete control over you. I don't know if I did that in class with y'all or not, but that's life.
Mm-hmm. Self-control is just the eternal puzzle in this life.
What were you gonna say, Dad?
I was just thinking about, Joe, you're saying that it's hard or takes time to do this decision stuff, that it makes me think about, I was always fill that vacancy really fast. We gotta get a body in there, have a person working, and of course made some mistakes with that. But I remember somebody kind of summarizing what is probably wisdom. A vacancy is a short-term problem, about hire is a long-term problem.
Yes.
So, the thing with this too is like, okay, some things shouldn't be shortchanged.
Yeah.
So one thing I've had, because Todd is so he's so much like Laura, which means he is not like me. So trying to have him approach something the way so he has loved baseball. Like it's like his new like sport of choice. But he is so contemplative. He is so thoughtful with how he approaches things. And baseball was so much reaction. So like talking about like you don't have time to. The discerning process takes time. And sometimes so what I've tried to talk to him about is when he gets frustrated where I'm learning to practice the same thing over and over again. I say when it comes second nature of how we are approaching this, when it comes to the point of doing it, it's a lot easier to make the decision. Like it's a reaction as opposed to something you have to think about. That's where we're getting problems. That's where I get in trouble with it as a parent. Is when I have cultivated this is my approach and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm a lot better parent. I have to react because I'm throwing a curveball. I'm not the best parent. But that's why I make mistakes.
And I think discernment for me is like that I don't know if it's because you've got the gift or because you've got the experience, that it become this, you know, that these are the things to think about. These are the people you need to go to. These are the scriptures that you want to go, okay, I remember that had something to do with this. I need to go look it up. And so you don't have to think about, all right, what's step 4 of the process? You know, it becomes a part of how you work your way through decisions.
Yes, I think becoming more Christ-like, and you should have something to show for your years. Becoming more Christ-like is probably that. It is the training and management of your impulses and your default and the raw you. When you hit your finger with the hammer, what will you say?
I think I know what Jesus said.
What have you practiced? Yeah, that is what's going to fly out. I'm not sure it does, actually. That's kind of my point. There is a default, there is an impulse. And to corral and shape and humble that, now that would be self-control.
Anything else about that process? I want to spend a little time on this voices part of it. Now, intentionally, cannot locate the internet server or proxy server after all that work.
Apply yourself.
Okay. It doesn't matter that much.
So lots of voices.
Lots of voices. Just imagine lots of annoying voices. And we have so many annoying voices in our face all the time. And so many who are absolutely certain that they know that this is true, and they're opposite each other. And so how do we discern from all those many, many voices that we hear? And these are some things that I've been thinking about for several years now. One is this: when you're trying to evaluate, does this voice sound anything like Jesus? And you know, you do that because you can answer that only when you've read enough and spent enough time in conversation to recognize Jesus' voice. You can't start out there. You have to spend some time with Jesus to understand what his voice sounds like. And then to help people who to kind of put some specific things on there. Do you hear compassion in this voice? Do you hear wisdom? Do you hear sacrifice? Do you hear grace? Do you hear love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Do you hear those fruits of the Spirit? And then this one's come up to me more and more recent. Does this voice sound like people you look up to as models of faith? Does this sound like your mama or your daddy? And does it sound like the pastors you grew up with? Does it got any resonance with people that you look up to as models of faith? What would they say about this voice? Boy, I ask myself a lot about, man, what would my daddy say about that?
Which I think in our current political climate,
Right.
Yes. That's what got me thinking about this part of it.
that last one, where I have people who I have looked to as models of faith. And now I'm like, they're listening to the same person I'm listening to. And I see nothing of what the first question.
Yes. Which is just a reminder that they're fallible, right?
Yeah.
And it's one of the, and it's the balance of that, but I'm also, I'm like, it's hard, because I'm like, because sometimes I'm a self-doubter. Am I hearing this wrong?
That's a good
Is
question.
there something I'm missing?
Mhm.
And, which, and it, but that, it's something I've talked about with the youth over and over again the last month or so. It all goes back to humility, this idea that we don't know, we have to find what, but we're working on finding Him. And I think always going back to the first one.
The first question is really the only one that matters. We have to deal with what that means.
If
How
you're- If you're a Christian.
If you're a Christian, yeah.
And that makes you wonder, because I've always been told, well, you can't judge people. Well, I'm not judging them, I'm just weighing the issues. I mean, they're responsible for themselves, not me. But I can weigh their input, their comments, how they make me feel. Do they make me feel confident in what they know? Well, if they don't make me feel confident, then maybe I'm in trouble. But maybe they're in trouble. But
Fruit, yeah. And that's one thing I like about the second question is, even if someone is not well versed in Jesus, those are some values that are in our culture that people would know what joy, peace, and patience and kindness are. Should know. But for Christians, the first question is really the only one. And if we can't answer that, then we have to look further down the road. What responses does this voice trigger? Does this voice make the hair on the back of your neck stand up? And that goes back to that visceral part of it, that there is something built into us that we know something's not right here. And some of us are better at that. And gosh, she can detect darkness and BS like no one I know. And she'll say, watch, beware. And we have to pay attention to that, because if you're a person who always assumes the best about everybody, sometimes we'll blow off that visceral reaction.
that first impression.
Yeah, and it's deeper than a first impression, I think.
Yeah.
It's physical. And so I think that's an important question as well.
Well, some people have a way of saying things that can sound truthful to you, but the problem is they're not being truthful. They're telling you things that maybe are true, but they don't really understand. They're not using that to improve the situation. They're just telling that to you so that you'll be gullible enough to believe that they think it's true.
Go back to the current political situation. I was in a conversation with somebody and I can't remember what they were saying, but the thing that I came back with was people who were hurting felt heard by Trump.
Yeah.
He was saying things that connected with their pain. Wouldn't it have been better if someone with integrity had communicated that they heard their pain and could communicate to them that, yes, I hear where you're hurting and understand where you're at?
And it's one of those,
Well,
I think it's more than hearing, it's, I don't think you can say, I hear you and I understand. But when you like, I hear you, I understand, I'm pissed off too. And I think that it feeds into the emotional aspect of it, as
Mhm.
opposed to, I hear you and I want to work with you to do this.
Yeah.
Because I think that I've heard both parties, people from both parties who have talked like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it goes by the wayside because someone else is shouting it as opposed to saying, hey, I'm going to do the work with you, as opposed to somebody saying, I want to fix it.
Yeah. Or it makes me angry too.
And 'cause which actually is actually what my new set article is about. So I've had people get mad at me before because I don't get mad when they get mad. And I see it was Laura. And it's because you want something. Because when you have somebody you care for, somebody cares for you, you feel these things together.
Mhm.
And which is why, like, Laura, I'm upset about that too, but I process it differently.
Mhm.
Or like, I don't think that's something to be upset about. But there's something that when someone gives us that connection, that we latch onto that more than being more discerning and trying to figure out what's behind this.
Mhm. It's not easy. Not easy.
well, and what happens is people latch onto the things. Well, this person knows how to fix this. They know how to do this. They've had a life built of doing this. So let's do it quick. And most of us want things done quick. We want things, have somebody that knows what they're doing, fix it. But we've got to discern whether this person really knows how to fix something or not. You can
Boy,
take-
that's a good question for a lot of things.
Your mechanic down here can
Yeah.
tell you what's wrong with your car. So, okay, fix it. 3 days later and $1,000. Well, we haven't been able to find the problem yet. But you owe us money.
Mm-hmm.
Stop.
Mm-hmm.
We've discerned that that's not a true mechanic that knows what he's doing. So, it doesn't take you long to find out that people don't know what they're talking about. If you know something about the situation. If you don't know anything about the situation, you're left gullible and
Yeah.
high and dry.
And that goes back to what you were saying early, that connection between learning and discerning.
Yeah.
Sometimes what you discern is, I don't know anything about this. I need to find out more before I make a choice.
Ask another mechanic.
Yeah. I need to do some
I
more.
run through several mechanics, but
Mm-hmm.
giving them problems that I couldn't solve. You're a mechanic, you solve it. Oh, well, we found that. We replaced this, we replaced this, we replaced this. Well, which one of those was the problem? Well, I don't know because we haven't fixed the problem yet. Okay, so I go to another mechanic and they do an evaluation. It takes them 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
We found the problem. It's your ignition coil. Oh, nobody else ever said anything about that. They fixed it and fixed the problem. So changing mechanics or finding somebody that knows what they're talking about, and whether they really know what they're talking about or if they're just giving you a bunch of
Goes back to fruit.
Yes, and so this is our hope in the political scene here, that sunlight will come and expose who knows what's going on and who is really competent and able to fix things
It'll come
and
out.
who is not. So
Truth will eventually come out.
if you're willing to admit that you've been wrong, then you can see in that sunlight. I think there'll be some people who never.
What's, I just heard in the book, I think it's JFK said, success has 1,000 fathers, but failure is an orphan.
Yeah.
That's the thing with politics, that happens. It's hard.
Oh, no, I don't know how that happened.
Yes, yeah, it was the other part, we inherited this.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last thing on the voices is those Cassian's questions work just as well on voices. You know, is it filled with what is good for all? Is it filled with a fear of God, reverence for God, genuine? Or is it lightweight with human glory or novelty? I still love that phrase because it's so antique sounding, but you know right what he's talking about. And consolation and desolation. All right. Anything else?